The farm stilled. Not a picturesque pause under golden light, but the held breath of prey before a strike. Elowen's fingertip traced the frequency dial, the static alive current against her skin. It had begun as a murmur, a distortion in the long-range bands, echoes of signals bleeding from beyond the Kuiper belt, the ghosts of distant quasars. Now, it felt less like listening, more like immersion. The ancient radio throbbed, a vibration that rattled her teeth. She'd assembled it mostly from salvaged satellite parts and surplus military auctions. Ungainly, yes, but functional. Usually. Tonight, the familiar hiss had escalated into a furious roar, crackles tasting metallic and sharp, like ozone on the tongue. Come on, she coaxed, nudging the fine-tuning knob. The signal, whatever it was, remained buried. Frustration clenched her jaw, and she tightened her grip on the knob, knuckles bone-white. Barnaby, the farm collie, whimpered, nudging her leg with his wet nose. He'd been on edge for hours, ears pivoting, tail tucked tight. A thunderstorm usually sent him scrambling under the porch. This wasn't weather. Suddenly, the barn lights stuttered, dimming and brightening in jagged pulses. The farmhouse followed, plunging into near darkness. Elowen's gaze flicked to the small, grimy window. A violent storm churned on the western horizon, bruised purple against the darkening sky. But the timing felt wrong. The electromagnetic surge predated the thickest cloud cover. Then the shift. Not a sound, not precisely. A feeling. A prickling across her arms, the hairs on her neck rising. The air thickened, charged, heavy on her lungs. Barnaby erupted in sharp barks, pacing frantically, his eyes locked on the back pasture, beyond the barn. Elowen dismissed it, or tried to. Just a phase, she muttered, adjusting the gain. Atmospheric conditions. A flare, maybe. Even as the words left her mouth, she knew it wasn't simple. The static spiked, then vanished, replaced by an unsettling, absolute silence. She spun around, peering into the gloom beyond the workshop door. Just the cornfields swaying like restless ghosts, the bulk of the barn a hulking shadow. But something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Then she saw it. A dark, disc-shaped object descending silently behind the barn. It moved with impossible smoothness, lacking any visible means of propulsion. No tumbling, no drift. It settled, lowered as if by an unseen hand. Not large, perhaps 30 feet across, but radiating a cold, unnatural stillness. For a heartbeat, Elowen thought it a trick of the light, a bizarre cloud formation. A weather balloon. She blinked, rubbed grit from her eyes, and looked again. It remained. Solid. Metallic. Undeniably there. Mom? Dad? She called, abandoning the radio. They were in the kitchen, finishing up dinner. Her mother appeared first, wiping her hands on a floral apron. What is it, honey? Everything all right? I think something landed behind the barn. A disc. Round and dark. Her mother followed Elowen's gaze, squinting into the fading light. Oh, that's probably just old man Hemlock's drone. He's been testing it out, spraying for aphids. No, it's not a drone. It's bigger. And silent. It just descended. Her father ambled over, skepticism etched on his face. He glanced dismissively toward the barn. Probably just a trick of the light, Elowen. You've been glued to those screens all day. Your imagination's running away with you. But I saw it, she insisted, her voice catching slightly. You always were a dreamer, her mother said gently, but firmly. Come on, let's get back to supper. Elowen hesitated, wanting to argue, to drag them outside. But it would be futile. They wouldn't understand. They never did. She trailed behind them, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. The prickling unease hadn't lessened. It had sharpened, become a physical ache. Back in the workshop, Barnaby continued to whine, his gaze fixed on the barn. Elowen glanced out the window one last time. The dark disk remained, partially obscured by shadows, merging with the night. It felt less like a fleeting anomaly and more like a silent, watchful presence. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever had just landed wasn't interested in aphids. Diesel fumes mingled with the dust of harvested wheat, a gritty sweetness clinging to the late afternoon air. Elowen wrestled with a stubborn bolt on the tractor's magneto, the cold steel biting into her fingertips. Barnaby, the farm collie, keened from the field's edge, his eyes glued to the barn. He hadn't ceased his mournful calls since twilight began to bleed into the landscape. She tried to ignore him, concentrating on the repair, but her grip tightened on the wrench, knuckles bleaching white. The radio remained silent, yet a low thrum now vibrated through the workshop floor, almost lost to feeling, deeply unsettling. A shadow bisected her workbench, not the gradual stretch of the setting sun, but something sudden. Elowen jerked upright, the wrench ringing against the toolbox. Joni filled the doorway. 5 years. 5 years since the launch, the hopeful press releases, the dwindling updates, and finally, the official word. Lost, presumed deceased, the exploratory vessel Starseeker and crew. And now this. Joni hadn't aged a day. The same dark curls tumbled around her face. The same wry curve touched her lips. The same amused spark flickered in her green eyes. She wore a simple jumpsuit, the material alien, possessing a subtle, pearlescent sheen, and her boots were scuffed, yet unnaturally clean. Elowen, she breathed, her voice a low, resonant chime. The sound of her name scraped against something long dormant within Elowen. Her tongue felt thick, rooted to the back of her throat. Joni, she rasped, the word little more than a question. Joni offered a smile, slow and knowing, yet it didn't quite warm her eyes. Hello. She moved into the workshop, not walking so much as drifting. A subtle smoothing of motion, a defying of gravity. The workbench trembled as she approached, not from vibration, but something radiating from her. You look well. Elowen managed, her voice still unsteady. Different, though. Seeing the universe from a new vantage point does that to a person, Joni replied, her gaze sweeping across the workshop, cataloging the tools, the half-finished projects, the ordered chaos. She paused at the radio, her fingers lightly tracing the dials. Still listening for echoes? What happened? Elowen pressed, struggling to steer the conversation. Where have you been? The Starseeker. Found a route home, Joni said, dismissing the details. She avoided Elowen's gaze. It wasn't just a voyage through space. Not in the way you'd imagine. What do you mean? Elowen gripped the workbench's edge, needing something solid beneath her palms. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. Joni finally turned, her gaze locking onto Elowen's. A weight of experience resided in those eyes, a vastness that threatened to swallow her whole. That's a story for another time, and we have plenty. But right now, she paused, a faint smile ghosting her lips. I want to hear about your signals. What are you picking up? She indicated the radio with a slight tilt of her head, and Elowen, despite a rising tide of unease, found herself compelled to obey. Elowen's jaw clenched. The signal, once a frustrating whisper, now pulsed with brutal clarity, but wrong. Sharper. Clicks and whirs bypassed her ears, vibrating in her teeth like a dental drill. It hadn't just amplified, it had been reformed. Joni hadn't merely boosted the gain, she'd sculpted the static into coherence. How'd you manage that? Elowen breathed, the words a fragile tremor she hadn't realized escaped her. Joni didn't meet her gaze, her focus locked on the swirling patterns blooming across a holographic projector, a device Elowen hadn't known her sister possessed. It hovered above the chipped Formica countertop, radiating a faint blue corona that blurred into Joni's silhouette. An old trick, manipulating resonant frequencies, like tuning a ridiculously complex instrument. Tuning? It sounded like a voice, a language. Elowen inched closer, her fingers brushing the deactivated kill switch for the radio, an instinctive gesture she instantly regretted. It felt patronizing. Joni finally glanced at her, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. It is, or it was, before it fractured, before the distances. She traced a finger across the holographic display, and a section of the swirling pattern solidified into geometric shapes, pulsing with light. This isn't radio, Elowen. Not exactly. You're hearing, I'm showing you, a compression of subspace harmonics. Think of space not as emptiness, but as layers, folds. And sometimes, those folds leak. A prickle of sweat slicked Elowen's forehead. She scrubbed a hand across her mouth. Subspace. She dismissed it as theoretical fluff, fanciful conjecture. You're saying, intercepting signals from between dimensions? Not dimensions, precisely, Joni corrected gently. More like, the spaces between dimensions. Conduits. And they aren't always empty. A tremor shuddered through Elowen's hands. She scanned the kitchen, suddenly aware of its mundane reality. The faded floral wallpaper peeling at the seams, the chipped enamel of the kettle, the dry, herbal scent hanging in the rafters. It felt insufficient. A flimsy shield against something vast. She needed to brace herself. Joni raised a hand, and the old electric clock on the wall, silent for years, sputtered back to life. But it didn't just tick. It pulsed with the projector's blue light, its hands spinning forward, then back, then forward again at an impossible, erratic speed. I can influence things. Fine-tune the connections. A side effect of navigating those folds. Elowen stared, mouth slack. Her sister, who'd spent her childhood dismantling toasters and rebuilding engines, was casually bending the laws of physics. A strangled sound caught in her throat. You can control electronics with your mind? Not my mind, exactly. Joni's voice was smooth as river stone. More like realigning energy signatures. Everything vibrates, Elowen. Everything has a frequency. I just learned how to listen. She deactivated the clock. Silence descended, the blue glow extinguished. A cold, sharp thought pierced Elowen's disbelief. The object, the disc-shaped thing landed behind the barn. That thing, the UFO. It brought you back. Joni's expression clouded, her gaze distant. It was a vessel, a key. But the journey, it wasn't about traveling through space, Elowen. It was about folding it. She paused, her eyes meeting Elowen's, a profound sadness etched beneath the surface. And seeing things no one should ever see. Elowen's breath hitched. The implications crashed over her, a tidal wave of impossible truth. This wasn't a homecoming. It was something else. Something terrifying, magnificent. A tremor started in her legs. She gripped the edge of the workbench, knuckles white, fighting to stay upright. 5 years ago, the moment her sister vanished among the stars, her quiet life had ended. And now, it was irrevocably, irreversibly, beginning again. The workshop air prickled with ozone and flux, a metallic tang coating Elowen's tongue. Not unpleasant, exactly. More a tightening in her chest, a premonition. Joni hadn't lifted the wrench, hadn't fully pivoted from the barn doors, but her gaze was lost in the luminescence now blooming at the room's center. The projection defied any map Elowen knew. Not of land masses or borders, but of currents, rivers of radiant color, coiling and merging like bioluminescent shoals, tracing paths across an impossible black. A cascade of light, impossible hues bleeding into one another, a three-dimensional lattice that stretched past the farm, beyond the solar system, perhaps. It throbbed with a slow, almost imperceptible rhythm, like a vast, sleeping heart. What is it? Elowen breathed, her voice thin. She reached a finger toward one of the glowing strands, half expecting emptiness, but a faint warmth radiated back. Joni finally turned, her face etched with awe and exhaustion. A network. She edged closer, eyes tracking the intricate pattern. The Ethel. That's what they called it. An ancient race. They didn't travel to the stars. They circumvented the space between them. Elowen's thoughts scrambled. Circumvented space? Even after everything, it bordered on fantasy. Wormholes. Something akin to that. But stable. Natural. They built them, or discovered them, ages ago. These aren't tiers in space-time propped open by exotic matter. They're pathways. Conduits. Joni's voice dropped to a reverent hush. They mapped them, secured them, used them to connect worlds. To share knowledge, to assist. A prickle rose on the back of Elowen's neck. Assist who? Everyone. They were benevolent. But they're gone now. Erased centuries ago by something that consumes energy. Devours civilizations. Joni's knuckles bleached white against the workbench edge. The map shimmered, a section of the network flaring with a sickly, crimson light. Elowen flinched back. What was that? A failing conduit. They aren't infinite. They degrade over time. And this one, it leads to the last Ethel colony. They're under attack. Elowen's hands trembled, the vibration crawling up her arms. She braced against the workbench, fingernails digging into the grainy wood. The void-born, Joni stated, her voice flat. Entities that feed on stellar energy, on life itself. They've hunted the Ethel for generations. This conduit is all that stands between them and total annihilation. Elowen stared at the projection. The beautiful, intricate web, the crimson warning flare. And you want me to fix it? Joni met her gaze, desperation clouding her eyes. Not fix it, Elowen. Stabilize it. This conduit is on the verge of collapse. They've been broadcasting a signal, a beacon. It's what pulled me back. I charted most of the network, but I need someone with your skills to refine a device, to amplify the signal, to reinforce the energy field holding the conduit open. She gestured toward a partially disassembled console, wires cascading across the tabletop like silver vines. The resonator. Based on Ethel technology, but I need to integrate Earth-based components, adapt it to our power grids. Adapt alien tech to keep a dying race from being eaten by space monsters? Elowen's voice wavered, a shaky attempt at lightness. A surge of adrenaline jolted through her, fear battling with a strange exhilaration. Joni managed a ghost of a smile. Something like that. And it's not so much eaten as unmade. Their existence erased. Every star extinguished, every world drained. It's a legacy of silence. A silence we can't afford to let spread. She moved closer to the swirling map, her hand hovering over a nexus of particularly complex light. This is it, Elowen. This is where we begin. The workshop reeked of hot solder, ozone, and a delicate, almost floral fragrance clinging to the Ethel components, a scent Elowen hadn't registered at first, overwhelmed by the metallic bite of earthly engineering. Now, hours dissolved into a rhythm of connection, testing, recalibration, and the fragrance settled into something almost comforting. A strange calm settled over her in a room dedicated to preventing interstellar catastrophe. She traced a finger across the etched surface of the resonant chamber, a lattice of impossibly thin, silver filaments. Ethel technology, undeniably. Beautiful, almost organic in its design. But interfacing it with Earth-based power regulators proved a brutal exercise. Energy signatures didn't align. Not even close. Each attempt yielded either a dead short or a cascade of harmonic distortion that vibrated in her teeth. The frequency refuses to stabilize, she muttered, squinting at the fluctuating readings on her diagnostic panel. It's like chasing a ghost station on a broken radio, or trying to pull a signal from another dimension. Joni hadn't spoken in what felt like an age. She leaned against a workbench, arms folded, her face serene and unsettlingly still. No direct solutions. Only subtle nudges, a lifted eyebrow, a lingering glance at a discarded schematic. Harmonic resonance isn't about finding a matching frequency, Elowen, she said, her voice a low current cutting through the electrical hum. It's about creating one. About coaxing the energy into sympathetic vibration. Elowen frowned, worrying her inner cheek. Coaxing? With what? More silicon and copper? This stuff operates on principles we barely grasp. She swept a hand towards the Ethel core in frustration. It's not just different technology. It's a fundamentally different understanding of physics. Joni's gaze drifted to a heap of scavenged ferrite beads, rejected after failing to dampen the energy surges. Consider the shape, she suggested, her tone carefully neutral. Not the electrical properties, but the physical form. The Ethel favored geometries that contained, rather than resisted. Elowen's eyes tracked to the beads, then back to the resonant chamber. The core spiraled with complex curves, designed to channel energy inward. Her build, in contrast, favored straight lines and harsh angles. Functional. Efficient, perhaps, but off. A realization, sharp as a static shock, jolted through her. The Ethel didn't fight energy, they guided it, sculpted it. A resonant chamber within a resonant chamber, she breathed, a tired grin tugging at her lips. A nested harmonic structure, to amplify the sympathetic vibration. She snatched a handful of discarded ferrite beads, not as dampeners this time, but as building blocks. Carefully, she began reshaping them, molding miniature spirals, mimicking the Ethel core's patterns. Her soldering iron hovered, precise and sure, connecting the new elements. Joni's eyes followed her movements, her expression unreadable. A flicker, approval maybe, brushed her lips. Hours later, the modified chamber pulsed with a soft, ethereal glow. The readings on Elowen's panel steadied. A clear, unwavering harmonic frequency bloomed, resonating through the workshop. The floral scent thickened, filling the air with a strange, alien sweetness. Elowen leaned back, wiping sweat from her brow. Not perfect. Not yet. But a breakthrough. An exhilarating step toward something. She glanced at Joni, bracing for praise. Joni simply nodded, her face still a careful mask. Good, she said quietly. Now let's see if it holds. The floral scent, thick and cloying, lingered in the workshop, now less a comfort than a stifling weight. Elowen's fingertips traced the cool, seamless edge of the resonator's casing, ethyl alloy smooth beneath her touch. It hadn't held. Not fully. The harmonic frequency had bloomed for 17 minutes, 42 seconds, then dissolved into static. 17 minutes, 42 seconds closer to something. But not enough. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched shadows long and skeletal across the ripening wheat. A deceptive calm. She kept flicking her gaze towards the treeline, a prickle crawling across the nape of her neck. Not the familiar awareness that pulsed with the ethyl's resonance, but something colder, more calculating. Just the wind, she breathed, though the air itself felt viscous, unmoving. Joni, perched on a stool by the entrance, hadn't shifted since the test failed. She wasn't reading, hadn't touched the scavenged tech that choked every surface. She simply watched, like a predator sizing up its territory. Elowen's scalp tightened, a thin line of sweat beading above her temple. Dust motes hung suspended in the light, sluggish in their fall. A wave of nausea crested, subtle but insistent. She pressed a palm against her stomach, blaming it on the cherry pie from yesterday. Something's changed, Elowen murmured, her voice barely audible. We're being watched. Joni's gaze didn't break, but a fleeting ghost of a smile curved her lips. Observers, she said, a low hum in her throat. Interested in you. Elowen's jaw clenched. In us. In the resonator. In whatever that is out back. She angled her chin towards the barn's rear wall. The disc. All but forgotten in the past few days' frantic work. Joni didn't respond, merely raised a hand as a small, rectangular object thudded into the open mailbox. The mail carrier hadn't ventured this deep onto the property in years. Elowen strode towards the mailbox, her boots grinding on the gravel. The envelope was unmarked, stark white. Inside, a single sheet of cream-colored paper. No letter, only a string of chaotic numbers and symbols. Back at the workbench, her fingers danced across the keyboard, dissecting the code. Surprisingly simple, a Caesar cipher, layered with a polyalphabetic key. Basic. Insulting, even. Within minutes, the message resolved. Continue your work. We are aware. The message wasn't a warning. It was a claim. A possessive brand. Her shoulders bunched, muscles tightening beneath her skin. She wanted to dismantle the resonator, rip out the wiring, bury the ethyl cores so deep they'd never see light. They want to know what we're building, she said, her voice a strained whisper. What you know. Joni finally moved, sliding off the stool and approaching the workbench. She didn't glance at the message, didn't meet Elowen's eyes. Her gaze remained fixed on the resonator, on the faint, phantom glow still pulsing from its core. They think it's a weapon, Joni said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. They believe you're simply fixing something broken. They haven't considered what it actually is. Elowen's breath hitched. And you knew they'd contact us? Joni turned, her eyes finally locking with Elowen's. The unreadable mask was back, but beneath it, Elowen thought she glimpsed a flicker of something. Weariness? Resignation? They always do, Joni said, a touch of sadness roughening her tone. They always come looking. She paused, then added, her voice a low murmur. And when they do, it's rarely for polite conversation. The air bit with burnt ozone, laced with a cloying sweetness, the signature scent of ethyl components. Elowen's thighs trembled, a deep burn building with the strain of stillness as the resonator shuddered. Floorboards bucked beneath her boots, a low thrumming that vibrated in her molars. Joni stood unmoving, a granite statue amidst the escalating chaos. Readings had climbed steadily, promising a stable link. Then, a spike. A violet arc ripped across the barn's interior, and the air fractured with static. For a pulse, everything bleached white. Elowen squeezed her eyes shut, bracing against the impact. The metallic tang on her tongue sharpened, turning corrosive. A wave of cold burrowed into her bone, even through the thick coveralls. The barn groaned, aged wood protesting an impossible pressure. A jagged rent tore through the far wall, shimmering with a distortion that wasn't a break, but a displacement. A fleeting glimpse of something beyond the barn, something wrong. Then, as suddenly as it began, the surge ceased. The violet light vanished. The tremors subsided, dissolving into a dull hum. Elowen's eyelids flickered open. The rent remained, but was collapsing inward, the distorted image within unraveling like a dying photograph. Joni's hand blurred, slamming a heavy kill switch. A final pulse of energy shuddered through the resonator, then silence. Elowen's breath snagged in her throat. She tasted blood, a coppery bloom where she'd bitten her cheek. Adrenaline kept her fingers twitching. Ignoring the ache radiating from her shoulders, she sketched furiously on a datapad, diagrams blooming over the schematic of the containment field. A long moment stretched. Elowen kept her head bent, refusing to meet Joni's gaze. The air hung charged, brittle. She needed to dissect the data, find the fracture. Containment failed, Joni stated, her voice flat, almost clinical. Not an observation, but a pronouncement. An assessment already underway. Elowen nodded, pencil scratching across the screen. Energy bleed through. Dampeners couldn't compensate for the initial surge. It nearly unmade the barn. Nearly isn't a metric we work with. Joni's fingers flew over a control panel, summoning a cascade of waveforms. She adjusted a setting with precise economy. The resonator's core throbbed faintly, a subdued glow following the violent outburst. We miscalculated the power draw. Severely. Elowen traced a line on her datapad, calculating the energy expenditure. The Ethel matrix is amplifying the output beyond prediction. It's not just stabilizing the conduit, it's generating energy. The field can't contain it. A dangerous thrill prickled her skin. This felt beyond engineering, beyond science. Refine the field geometry. Joni's gaze remained locked on the waveforms. Triple the dampener capacity and modulate the resonance frequency. It's oscillating at a destabilizing harmonic. Elowen's mind raced, fingers flying. Right. Dampeners, ×3. Modulation frequency, checking harmonics now. She jabbed at the datapad, rerouting power to the auxiliary capacitors. I can pull from the secondary coils, push dampener output. It'll strain the grid, but it should hold. Joni offered no reply, no encouragement, no rebuke. Simply watched, a silent observer as Elowen wrestled with equations and recalibrated the resonator's flow. Elowen found an odd comfort in the silence. Joni didn't coddle, but she didn't dismiss the danger. She demanded competence, and Elowen would deliver. Okay, Elowen said, her voice tight with focus. That should do it. Dampeners at 320%. Frequency modulated. Ready to run another test. The workshop thrummed, a low vibration that rattled Elowen's teeth. Not the steady pulse of a functioning resonator, but a frantic stutter. Each beat resonated in her sternum, a tightening pressure with every failed harmonic. She clenched her datapad, knuckles brushing against the cool, slick metal. Okay, she forced out, her throat constricted. Dampeners to 320%. Frequency modulated. Ready for another run. Joni didn't glance up. Her fingers flew across the Ethel device's control panel, precise and rapid. A sheen of sweat slicked her temples, but her face remained a smooth mask of concentration. No reassurance offered. None needed. Elowen understood the stakes. A hiss of displaced air, a flicker in the barn's fluorescent tubes, then static. Not random crackle, but a focused distortion. It tasted of ozone and something metallic, a cold tang on her tongue. Then, a voice. Fragmented, layered in distortion, it bypassed her ears and seemed to drill directly into her skull. A rush of alien syllables, then a single word, raw with desperation. Thar. Joni's jaw tightened. The tiny muscles in her neck pulsed beneath the skin. Her hand, hovering over a control, trembled almost imperceptibly. She avoided Elowen's gaze, all focus locked on the swirling, iridescent core of the resonator. More fragments tumbled through the static. Attack, consuming light. The voice, ancient, yet laced with terror, faded. They're under attack, Joni rasped, the statement clipped. The Voidborn. Voidborn. Elowen's fingers blurred across the datapad, initiating a search. Results were sparse, cryptic, old Ethel texts referencing entities that fed on stellar energy, leaving behind emptiness. A predatory darkness. Not creatures, not as we know them, Joni explained, her voice economical. A disruption. A fundamental unraveling of energy. The Cthar, they mastered the conduits, built lives around stellar currents. The void-born drain those currents, leave planets as husks. Another burst of static, then a scream, a sound that didn't reach her ears, but resonated in her bones, making her teeth ache. She flinched, a primal fear seizing her. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. Elowen stared at Joni, her heart hammering against her ribs. What do they want? Joni's gaze finally met hers. Her usually cool gray eyes burned with desperate urgency. Everything. Entire star systems. Cthar is all that stands between them and everything else. She pressed a hand to her temple, a fleeting grimace of pain crossing her features. The resonator is their last hope. It's the only device capable of amplifying their shielding, stabilizing the conduit for a warding signal. The resonator sputtered, a high-pitched whine escalating into a grinding shriek. A visible distortion warped the air around it, making the metal tools on the workbench shimmer. Elowen tasted copper. "We're losing the connection," she said, her voice strained. She rerouted power, bypassing safety protocols, pushing the resonator to its limits. A jolt surged through her arms. The signal's degrading. It's like something is suppressing it. A fragmented plea, barely audible above the static, cut through the noise. Help before darkness. Joni's hand tightened on the control panel, knuckles bone-white. Elowen, boost the containment field. Now, we need a stable aperture, even for a few seconds. They need to know we're still here. Elowen didn't hesitate. She dove back into the equations, her fingers a blur, rewriting code, rerouting power, sacrificing efficiency for raw output. The air crackled. The floral scent of the ethyl components intensified, becoming cloying, overwhelming. The barn groaned under the strain, as if the foundations vibrated with the dying signal. The silence descended, not an absence of sound, but a pressure against the eardrums. The resonators hum, the UFO's shield thrum, even the static's crackle, all strangled off mid-note. Elowen's breath snagged, freezing in her chest. A chill skittered across her skin, leaching the warmth from her limbs. It wasn't a disruption so much as a predator pausing, savoring the moment before the strike. Shields are collapsing. Joni clipped, her gaze locked on the cascading data of a holographic display. The failing containment field cast a sickly green wash over the barn's rough-hewn timbers, stretching shadows into grotesque shapes. Outside, the wind stilled. An unnatural quiet, heavier than the pause before a summer squall, pressed against the corrugated metal. Elowen tasted iron, the phantom bite of bitten cheek. What about the projections? Holding for now. A focused scan will shred them. Joni's fingers flew across the control panel, diverting power, tightening the holographic veil around the farm. The images flickered, wavered as if submerged in water, rolling fields of wheat, a deceptive illusion of peace. Then came the first impact. Not a crash, but a dull thud that vibrated through the floorboards, rattled Elowen's teeth. The barn groaned, wood protesting under the strain. They're bypassing the perimeter. Irrelevant. Joni's tone was razor-sharp. We have company. Focus on the resonator. Containment is critical. 80%. Elowen didn't argue. Seconds mattered. Every wasted one courted disaster. She rerouted power, ignored safety protocols, pushed the resonator to its limit. A jolt surged through her arms. The sweet, heavy scent of ethyl components flooded the air, thickening until it clung to the back of her throat, a cloying perfume of desperation. Another thud, closer now. Voices followed, harsh and clipped, warped by static. Sector 4 secure. No sign of the object. False positive. They're using thermals. The shielding's masking it, barely. Joni's voice remained a steady undercurrent beneath the rising chaos, her movements precise, almost unsettling in their efficiency. The signal, Elowen murmured, her fingers blurring across the datapad, rewriting code, sacrificing efficiency for brute force. It's weakening. Stabilize it. Just a few more seconds. Static exploded from the speakers, followed by a strangled scream. The holographic projections fractured, revealing muddy fields beyond. A dark shape, a vehicle, hurtled toward the barn, headlights carving through the gloom. They've breached the first layer. Elowen risked a glance at the external feed. Armored figures, black tactical gear obscuring their forms, swarmed the field, weapons raised. The sheer number of them. It pressed on her chest, stealing her air. Joni didn't flinch. Her focus remained fixed on the resonator, jaw tight, gaze unwavering. Elowen, containment's failing. Surge it. Overload the capacitors. Are you sure? That's extreme. The resonator already pulsed with unstable energy. A full overload could. We have no choice. Joni's voice tolerated no dissent. Do it. Elowen hesitated, a beat of cold dread, then obeyed. She funneled power into the resonator, ignoring the warning sirens that clawed at her ears. The device shuddered, groaning under the load. A sickly green light pulsed from its core, bathing the workshop in an eerie glow. The air crackled, static raising the hairs on her arms. The barn itself vibrated, ancient wood creaking in protest. Outside, the armored figures paused, momentarily disoriented by the electromagnetic pulse. The holograms dissolved, revealing the farm's true state. Now, Joni barked. Elowen slammed her fist onto the activation switch. The resonator flared with blinding light, a wave of energy washing over the barn. The remaining shields buckled, flared, then held. A shimmering, translucent barrier surrounded the device, not impenetrable, but enough to buy time. Another impact shook the barn, showering them with splinters. A section of the wall caved inward, revealing a breach. An armored figure squeezed through, weapon leveled. Joni, with impossible speed, spun and unleashed a focused pulse from a wrist-mounted device. The figure froze mid-stride, suspended for a heartbeat, then crumpled to the ground. Finish the repairs. Joni commanded, already engaging another attacker. I won't hold them forever. Elowen plunged back into the equations, her hands trembling, rewriting code, rerouting power, ignoring the chaos. The fragmented plea from the distant civilization echoed in her mind. Help? Before darkness, she had to push through the fear, the exhaustion, the rising tide of dread. They were counting on her. A fresh wave surged forward, pouring through the breaches. The workshop became a frantic ballet of energy blasts, shattered metal, and desperate struggle. A searing pain blossomed in Elowen's arm, hot and wet. She barely registered it, her focus laser-sharp on the resonator. Almost there. A few more lines of code. One final power reroute. And then it would be ready. The resonator throbbed, not with a clean, resonant tone, but a fractured chord, a desperate vibration wrestling with something, tearing. Elowen hammered at the console, holographic displays jittering with error messages. Red warnings scrolled across her vision, blurring at the periphery. Coolant and grime smeared her left hand, trembling as she initiated a cascade override. It's not holding, she breathed, the words lost to the resonator's rising whine. A plea, not a report. Joni, a silhouette against the pulsing violet of the conduit, didn't respond. Strain tightened her face as she fought to maintain the pathway. A tendril of black energy, thick as a python, lashed out from the swirling vortex. She pivoted, deflecting it with a shimmering shield projected from her wrist device. The impact shuddered through the barn, rattling the corrugated metal. They're adapting, Joni clipped, her voice tight. The disruption field isn't enough. They're trying to collapse it. Elowen stabbed at a command line, rerouting power from auxiliary systems to the containment field. The barn lights flickered, died, then surged back with a sickly green cast. Outside, the government vehicles stood silent, eerily so. Spectators now, useless against a threat from elsewhere. Energy levels spiking. Elowen shouted, fingers flying across the controls. The ethyl core is nearing critical. We need to bleed off power, or it's going to overload. Joni glanced at the core, its intricate crystalline lattice glowing with almost unbearable intensity. The floral scent, usually a subtle undercurrent, now choked Elowen's nostrils. Negative. Every joule is critical. Overriding the safety regulators is the only way to hold the field. Elowen hesitated. The ethyl core was volatile enough on a good day. Disabling the regulators, a massive gamble. That could cause a cascade failure, Joni. We could lose everything. We'll lose more than that if this falls. Joni's gaze locked with Elowen's. A flicker, resignation, crossed her face. They need me, Elowen. They're running out of time. Panic clenched Elowen's throat, stealing her breath. Her vision narrowed, focusing on the cascading errors. Beneath the fear, a cold determination settled. They had come too far. She initiated the override, the console shrieking a final protest as the safety protocols dropped. The resonator pulsed, a wave of raw energy washing over the workshop. Static crackled in the air, raising gooseflesh on Elowen's arms. The conduit stabilized, the vortex resolving into a clearer, more defined portal. Through the shimmering gateway, Elowen glimpsed a world unlike any she'd imagined. Towering crystal structures pierced a lavender sky. Bioluminescent flora lit vast, alien landscapes. Breathtaking and terribly exposed. But the respite fractured. Emboldened, the Voidborn surged forward. More tendrils, darker and thicker, erupted from the portal, lashing at the containment field. Joni moved with impossible speed, deflecting them with energy blasts from her wrist device. But they were relentless. Each impact sent tremors through the barn, threatening to tear it apart. It's not enough, Joni grunted, twisting away from a vicious strike. They're bypassing the shield. Elowen focused on the resonator's energy matrix, pushing the system past its limits. She rerouted power from the UFO's shielding, diverting it to the containment field. The ship's lights dimmed, its internal systems groaning under the strain. Desperate, it bought them seconds. Holding, barely, she muttered, sweat stinging her eyes. The floral scent bordered on suffocating. Joni drew a deep breath, her face pale but firm. I'm going through. Elowen whirled around. Joni, no. It's too dangerous. There's no other choice. I need to disrupt them from the inside, buy you time to maintain the connection. Joni activated a device on her forearm, a weapon Elowen hadn't seen before. It hummed with contained energy, radiating a soft blue glow. But, Elowen began, her voice catching. Joni met her gaze, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Take care of things here, little sister. Without another word, she launched herself towards the conduit, stepping into the swirling vortex. For a moment, she was a silhouette against the alien landscape, then she vanished. The portal shuddered, the containment field flickering wildly. The Voidborn, sensing Joni's departure, redoubled their efforts. Tendrils converged on the resonator, probing for weakness. Elowen fought to maintain the energy flow, her hands a blur of precision. But the system faltered. The ethyl core throbbed with unstable energy, threatening to breach containment. No, 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 she breathed, her voice cracking. A final tendril slammed into the primary containment matrix, shattering the energy field. Alarms blared, bathing the workshop in a chaotic strobe of red. The portal began to collapse, the vortex shrinking, twisting, turning inward. Elowen pushed the resonator harder, feeding it every remaining ounce of power. Futile. The system overloaded, on the verge of disintegration. The connection frayed, the alien landscape dissolving into static. With a final, agonizing groan, the resonator sputtered and died. The conduit winked out, leaving only the faint scent of ethyl and the echo of a lost world. Silence descended, broken only by the frantic beeping of failing systems. Elowen slumped forward, her forehead pressing against the console, the weight of loss crushing her. The air scraped against Elowen's throat, a coppery tang blooming on her tongue. Not blood, not yet, but the phantom aftertaste of dread. She hammered a fist into the console, the jolt climbing up her arm, and rerouted auxiliary power. The farm's grid bled into the resonator, dimming lights, silencing heaters, everything sacrificed for a connection fraying at the edges. Joni had already slipped through the shimmering distortion of the conduit, swallowed by whirls of amethyst and black. She hadn't met Elowen's eyes before stepping through, only pressed out a tight, "Elowen, please," and vanished. Now, the portal buckled. Cracks fractured its surface, not like shattering glass, but like the unraveling of reality itself. The alien landscape within, towering crystal spires piercing skies choked with violet clouds, warped, angles twisting into impossible knots. Elowen's fingers danced across the control panel, frantic yet precise. She boosted the energy containment field, forcing more power into the failing matrix. The console shuddered, a low thrum building to a resonance that vibrated in her bones. The scent of ethyl, usually floral and calming, soured, turning cloying and sickeningly sweet, layered over the burnt tang of overloaded circuits. A tendril, black as pitch and radiating a bone-deep chill, lashed from the fracturing conduit. It didn't attack so much as test, probing the limits of the containment field. The tendril hit, and the primary energy barrier groaned, its metal supports yielding. Alarms wailed, a discordant chorus ripping through the workshop. Elowen braced, legs trembling, as a second, thicker tendril followed, faster. She slammed a hand onto the override, diverting power from the shielding generators of the landed craft. A dangerous gamble. Vulnerable, yes, but it might buy her seconds. The resonator groaned in protest, its core flaring white-hot. Elowen felt the heat on her skin, prickling through the reinforced fabric of her jacket. Another tendril crashed against the weakened containment, and a section of the energy field dissolved, gaping open with swirling darkness. The barn interior began to distort around the breach. Tools rattled on shelves, metal twisting, groaning. Dust motes swirled in chaotic, gravity-defying dances. No, 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 she breathed, her voice fracturing. Another surge from the conduit. This time, the tendrils didn't probe. They pushed, forcing their way through the disintegrating barrier, coiling, grasping, seeking to unravel reality. A draining coldness seeped into her mind, blurring her focus. Elowen poured every last reserve of energy into the resonator, bypassing safety protocols, ignoring the warning flashes cascading across the display. The system screamed, on the verge of collapse. The ethyl components pulsed with desperate, frantic light. She was running on fumes, on borrowed time, and a silent plea that Joni could hold back the tide. The portal shrank, contorted, threatening to tear the barn, everything within it, apart. Then, a surge of energy from within the conduit, a flash of silver that blinded her, followed by a shockwave that rattled her teeth. The tendrils recoiled, momentarily stunned. But they wouldn't stay back for long. She knew, with chilling certainty, that this was only the first ripple. The resonator coughed, sputtered, then died, a fractured exhale of failing power. Ethyl components, blazing silver moments before, dulled to charcoal. Elowen slumped against the console, legs trembling, the metallic tang of ozone stinging her tongue. The barn's foundation stilled, the frantic vibrations ceasing with a jolt that left her ears ringing. Joni hadn't moved. She stood within the dissipating corona of the conduit, the fragmented portal shimmering like heat above asphalt. The tendrils of the void-born were gone, banished, or merely drawn back. Elowen couldn't be sure. Stable, Elowen rasped, the word catching in her throat. A lie. The conduit had imploded, the connection severed. Joni finally turned, exhaustion etching her face, but her eyes burned with fierce resolve. Silver streaks in her dark hair seemed to catch and hold the dwindling light. She moved with a grace Elowen hadn't noticed before, as if gravity's pull had lessened. For now, Joni murmured, her voice a low vibration. Just long enough. She crunched across the gravel of the farmyard towards the waiting craft, the disk that had descended 5 years ago, now bathed in moonlight. Each step sent a small spray of stone biting underfoot, a sound achingly familiar. Elowen watched, mute, an ache constricting her chest, making each breath shallow. Joni paused at the ramp, pivoting to face Elowen. Starlight fractured in her eyes, a universe of unspoken words reflected within. She offered no comfort, no softening of the truth. Only acceptance. They need help, Elowen. More than I can give them alone. I have to stay. Rebuild their defenses. They barely made it. Elowen's jaw clenched. She forced a swallow, her throat tight and dry. Not a goodbye, not exactly. A dismantling. A severing of threads woven since childhood. Joni's hand disappeared into a pocket of her worn flight suit, emerging with a crystal. It wasn't glass, or quartz, or anything Elowen recognized. A polished stone that pulsed with an internal light, a miniature nebula swirling within. A piece of their world, Joni said, extending it. A reminder. And a promise. Elowen accepted the crystal, its surface cool and smooth against her palm. It felt alive, thrumming faintly. They're working on communication. It won't be easy, but they said, you'll understand. You always have. She began her ascent, her silhouette shrinking against the ship's dark hull. The hatch hissed closed. Silence descended. Then the familiar hum of the power core swelled, a steady thrum vibrating through the ground. The ship rose slowly, silently, hovering over the barn. Then, with a contained burst of energy, it shot upwards, leaving behind a swirl of disturbed dust and the lingering scent of ozone, overlaid with something ancient and floral. Elowen stood in the quiet, the crystal warming in her hand. The farm felt reduced, diminished, but not desolate. The weight in her chest hadn't lifted, but had shifted, transformed into a burgeoning wonder. She raised her gaze to the star-dusted sky, tracing the constellations. No longer distant pinpricks, but pathways. Possibilities. Responsibilities. She tightened her grip on the crystal, a tiny beacon from another world, and turned back towards the workshop, her boots crunching on the gravel. Work awaited. Knowledge to unravel. A signal to learn to hear.